Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Thursday, the 2nd of July, 2026. Today, the movement to erase murdered Palestinian journalists and more foreign funding for the UK's Reform Party is revealed. First, the headlines. The British Museum made false claims about why it removed the word Palestine from displays, a Middle East Eye investigation has revealed. Internal emails show the terms Palestinian and Israelite occupation were also erased in direct response to months of lobbying in 2024. When asked at the time, the museum and its director flatly denied this. My colleague Lucy Anais reported in February.
I've come to the British Museum here in London to check out the exhibition behind me, after it sparked controversy after removing the word Palestine from some of its displays. The museum told us the term is no longer considered neutral, and it had opted for more historically accurate language.
The museum had added that the changes were based on audience testing. However, a Freedom of Information request reveals no such testing occurred. The term Palestine was removed due to private and public complaints by pro-Israeli organisations and activists, not impartial focus groups. Pakistan's foreign ministry has said mediators had concluded another round of indirect negotiations between the US and Iran in Doha. They said positive progress was made and discussions would continue. The indirect talks come amid tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, where the US and Iran continue to trade fire despite a formal ceasefire. The US insists on freedom of navigation, while Iran is determined to maintain control over transit and ultimately charge fees for passage of the waterway. As the disagreement continues, the UN has been forced to suspend its attempts to evacuate seafarers out of the area. Roughly 10,000 remain stranded at sea. An apparent rift between the US and Saudi Arabia has come to light following a report by the Wall Street Journal. The dispute reportedly began in May when Saudi Arabia denied the US use of its airspace and bases to launch Project Freedom, Trump's attempted mission to guide ships through the Strait of Hormuz. The US then threatened to withhold a delivery of missile interceptors, which the kingdom needs to defend against Iranian fire. Saudi Arabia eventually backed down, but tensions appear to remain. Saudi Arabia did not appear at the G7 summit last month, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio skipped the kingdom on his recent tour of the Gulf states. It reflects growing regional distrust of the US as a reliable security partner since the war on Iran began. Up next, Palestinian journalists face a new kind of jeopardy. There is a list that tracks journalists who are killed for their work all over the world. The list by the Committee to Protect Journalists is a key historical record. For example, it tells us the past 2 years have been the deadliest on record for reporters. It also tells us why. More journalists have been killed in Gaza than in both world wars, the Vietnam War, the wars in Yugoslavia, and the US war in Afghanistan combined. And it tells us which nation has murdered more journalists than any other. Israel, which has not let international journalists into Gaza. The CPJ has come under intense fire for documenting these crimes and political pressure to revoke Palestinian names in particular. Then last week, the CPJ said it was reviewing its documentation of journalists killed during the Israel-Gaza War. 20 Palestinians were revoked after militant groups published obituaries identifying them as members. One board member spoke out publicly. She said the review process went beyond individuals and sought to change the group's very definition of journalist in a way that would broadly exclude Palestinians and Lebanese who had been killed. Under international law, journalists affiliated with militant and state groups are protected as civilians as long as they are not directly participating in hostilities. Dr. Nika Soon-Shiong wrote to the committee and called for a vote on the controversial changes. The next day, she was told her term on the board had expired. After days of backlash, the CPJ board has now voted against the changes and reaffirmed its original definition. It rejected claims it had sought to exclude particular groups. I'm joined by Dr. Nika Soon-Shiong, the board member who was removed after complaining, to explain the dispute and what lies behind it. Welcome to MEE Live. Nika, why were these exclusions so concerning to you that you felt compelled to raise the issue publicly?
Well, the Board of Committee to Protect Journalists set up a task force to reevaluate the protection of journalists who are affiliated with non-military wings of identified terrorist organizations. And as we know, terrorism is a term that gives the appearance of objectivity, but is in fact used politically. The reason why Nelson Mandela was on the US terror watch list until 2008. And so I think at a time when this accusation is used to delegitimize Gazan, in particular, Gazan journalists who are telling the world about Israel's crimes, we have to really consider this timing, the composition of the task force, and who really approves it going forward.
Now, if I'm correct, there's sort of two issues in play here. One of them is the decision by the CPJ to review its list of casualties in the Israel war in Gaza, and they removed some Palestinian names after they'd been identified by militant groups as being part of those groups. And then the other issue was about this decision to potentially redefine the term journalist altogether in a way that might discriminatorily or disproportionately exclude Palestinian and Lebanese journalists. Am I understanding the situation correctly? Those were the two sort of concerns raised. And could you just update us about the status of each of those issues today?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to distinguish the two and to say that the process of developing the dashboard is really the heroic work of the Committee to Protect Journalists staff, which is quite different from the effort that I wrote about, that I posted about, and really that is primarily my concern. So there's a lot of criticism of the database and of the people who were removed. Committee to Protect Journalists recently stated that 7 were removed between 2023 and 2024, of which 2 were alive. And there's reasons for each of the removals. Now, I'm not in a position to criticize the removals of particular names, given that the way that this methodology works is that journalists affiliated with armed non-state actors, even those who are classified as a terrorist group by certain countries, are considered civilians, not combatants, and therefore are included in the database. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a definition that is based on international law, and which I think is really important to protect. The effort that really I opposed and that I called for a vote for was around changing that definition to begin with, which would categorically exclude a large number of Palestinian journalists for their affiliation and also for vaguely defined terms such as their behaviors or their activities that are seen to be inciting violence. And now this is actually something, in my mind, that's much more fundamental and much more political. And I think that I would really caution against the broad accusation of the organization and of the staff within the organization for having an ideological position or an intent to remove journalists. In fact, I think this is a methodological question which can be raised, in which the Committee to Protect Journalists is very open to addressing.
You've been a board member of the Committee to Protect Journalists for a long time, so presumably you hold the organisation in high regard. They have flagged that there's a lot of misinformation circling in the wake of this story. Help us to understand the difficulties that they face on this issue.
I think the Committee to Protect Journalists is rightfully protecting both the database and its definition as it currently stands, which is based in international law. I think that's the correct move for the organization to make. I also think that there are bad faith attacks against the organization, particularly geared to lobby the organization to remove even further numbers of Palestinian journalists who are accused of being affiliated with so-called terrorist groups. And so in many ways, it's necessary to affirm the board's recent decision to continue with the definition as it stands, and to further protect the organization from only receiving criticism from such groups. And we know where these accusations are coming from, and we know the intent because it's stated very clearly.
Now, information warfare has broken out over this story, as you've just indicated as well. One very active account has been Honest Reporting. This is a group that we've talked about here on MEE Live before. Here's what they said.
Nika Soon-Shiong, LA Times Nepo baby and publisher of Drop Site News, just got booted from the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Here's why that's a huge deal. The CPJ is the organization that puts out the most cited list of journalists killed in the Israel-Hamas war. The New York Times, the AP, the Washington Post have all used it for close to 3 years like it was fact. But we at Honest Reporting spent that time showing how the list included actual Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. We audited all 212 names on there. 102 of them, about half, were members or affiliates of a terror group, guys with literal martyr notices from Hamas and PIJ calling them their own fighters. The CPJ quietly started removing names off that list, about 20 so far, and then actually confirmed that 8 were combatants, aka terrorists. But they didn't really want to make it a whole thing. So enter Nika Soon-Shiong. She'd been on CPJ's board since 2021, while also running Dropsite News, an outlet we've repeatedly shown is basically PR for her.
Okay, now this account, which presents itself as an independent media watchdog, but exclusively posts in defense of Israeli state actions, it claims, Nika, that your board exclusion proves the CPJ called Gazan terrorists journalists. Their version of events is that the CPJ was attempting to quietly remove terrorists from the list without a formal process, in part due to Honest Reporting's own exposés. Is this an accurate representation of the process? And was this the kind of reaction that you were worried about when you raised your concerns?
Of course, and I'll say that under international law, journalists affiliated with armed actors, including those who are defined as terrorist groups by certain countries, are considered civilians, and they are journalists. And so, I think that this is a politicized term, and a term of which we have to be very wary. And we've watched the state of Israel commit unspeakable, unlawful violence against civilians. That is the very definition of terrorism. And we must ask, why is Honest Reporting headquartered in Tel Aviv? So we can call an organization Honest Reporting, Free Press, Truth Social, but I think people know the difference. People of conscience know the difference.
Now, this account, at the end of the reel there, it accuses the news outlet you work for, Dropsite News, of being terrorist PR. Does this not essentially reinforce the concerns that you raise about allowing political accusations to strip journalists of humanitarian protection?
Absolutely. I think these kinds of bad faith accusations are being used to silence journalists all over the world. We can look at what's happening in the UK as well. And so standing up against them and really delegitimizing the basis of those accusations is important. And thankfully, Dropsite is a completely independent newsroom, and we publish original investigative reports that are fact-checked, that are verified. And so I'd say the work stands for itself.
Now, Nika, you posted publicly that you were excluded from the board after calling for a vote on this decision. In a recent development, it seems the CPJ has decided to hold a vote, and the vote has overturned this redefinition. Will you be resuming your position on the board given this outcome?
I believe that's up to the board and to the board chair, but I have not received communication from the CPJ.
And as we conclude, can I ask whether this story is now resolved, or do you still remain concerned about the protection of journalists in contexts like Palestine and Lebanon?
I think this situation is not one that is soon to be resolved. Of course, I remain incredibly concerned and worried, but I think that we must take wins like this and understand the power of people around the world who understand Palestinian Gazan journalists' role in history and who honor it, and who understand journalists as the protectors of truth, particularly at a time when the truth is being weaponized and we're being told to disobey the evidence of our eyes and ears. So I'm really grateful for the board's decision, and I'm grateful for the time to speak with you.
Nika Soon-Shiong, thank you for joining me. Now to Syria. Military gates, surveillance systems, new bases, land seizures. While global attention has been elsewhere, Israel has quietly been expanding its footprint beyond the occupied Golan Heights. The Syrian Sigil Center monitors Israeli activity in Syria. It recorded nearly 300 Israeli operations in the provinces of Daraa and Kenitra in June alone. Middle East Eye looked at more than 1,600 alleged violations, examining the strategy behind Israel's growing presence in southern Syria and what it could mean for the region.
On the 8th of December 2024, the world watched Syria celebrate. Assad was gone. But while the world focused on Damascus, something else was happening 60 kilometers to the south. Israeli forces were crossing the 1974 ceasefire line, a boundary that had held for half a century, and within 48 hours, they had captured 350 square kilometers of Syrian territory. That's bigger than cities such as Milan, San Francisco, and even Paris. Nobody really noticed, and that was exactly the point. Since then, a Syrian monitoring group called the Sigil Center has been tracking what's happening on the ground. According to its records, more than 1,600 documented military violations inside Syria territory, a number that surged sharply after the start of the US-Israeli war on Iran. The head of Sigil Center, Hamza Ghadban, described Israeli expansion.
It spans from Mount Hermon in the north and to the Yarmouk Basin in the south and 15 kilometers into the depths of Syria. So you kind of have this triangle that is the hot spot for Israeli activities in Syria.
Within that triangle, Israel has now built military bases. Satellite images from late 2024 to late 2025 show a chain of fortified outposts running the full length of the Quneitra countryside, where more than 80% of all violations were concentrated. In northern Quneitra, 250 hectares of forest and farmland were demolished. In the village of Al-Hamidiyya alone, 16 homes were razed for a new military base. That equals to 12 families displaced. The area was later turned into a monitoring and control point west of the province center. Israeli forces seized the western Red Hill, and that's a strategic high point with the obstructed sightings deep into Syrian interior. Israel has also established 4 military gates which it used to construct a continuous geographic security belt. From these gates, Israeli forces have been conducting night raids, entering homes, detaining civilians, gathering residents at checkpoints, and committing verbal abuse and physical brutality. Then, the ecocide, a systematic spraying of unidentified chemical substances, killing livelihoods and withering large swaths of land, was recorded. Hundreds of farmers and sheep herders have been directly affected. Ghadban said such actions constitute to an attempt of silently displace people by killing their means of living, their income sources. And now, Israel is building what it calls a smart borders. In early 2026, Israel announced a $1.7 billion project to construct a wall on the borders within Syria and Jordan. Reports indicate that the 500 kilometers of AI-monitored walls using drones, ground reports, and sensor networks are being installed, stretching from the southern Golan Heights to the Sama Dunes near Eilat, Israel's southern tip. The new security barrier is being linked to the Sufa 53 project, which is a military road running parallel to the ceasefire line that Israel began constructing in mid-2022. And this isn't the first time. Israel has long been criticized for its use of artificial intelligence in Gaza, including identify bombing targets, and in the occupied West Bank, it has been used for facial recognition, cameras to track, target, and restrict millions of Palestinians' daily movement. Ghadban said the construction of the smart border is intended to strengthen security as Israel plans to expand settlement in Katsarin. Last month, the Israeli cabinet passed a rule to move 3,000 settler families into the Golan Heights by 2030. Israel is not just moving the borders, the scale of movement suggests it is attempting to reshape it. Politically, the endgame is increasingly clear. Israeli finance minister and settlement enthusiast Bezalel Smotrich said it plainly. Smotrich added that this would expand Israel's borders alongside similar operations in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon. 1,000 square kilometers of territory gained through land grabs and incursions. A calculation by the Financial Times put the land grab at roughly 5% of Israel's 1949 borders. Defense Minister Israel Katz dubbed down, Israel will not move a millimeter from Syria. Since the Assad government collapsed, the international community has largely looked away as Israel continues to carry out unprecedented military expansions into southern Syria. There's a pattern that feels very familiar, and for many Syrians, the question is no longer whether Israel is intending to stay, it's whether anyone with the power to stop it is paying any attention.
Up next, a new declassified investigation here in the UK reveals the Israeli government spent £50,000 lobbying the Reform Party, a move that could be illegal. Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs funded a 6-day trip for members of the far-right group in November via a third party. A separate visit was made by Reform's deputy leader Richard Tice, funded by a group called Reform Friends for Israel. Friends of Israel. Now, the multimillionaire then claimed the Gaza famine was a blatant lie. Foreign state interference is considered a major threat to democracy. It is illegal for foreign governments to fund UK parties, but there are various ways foreign money enters Westminster nonetheless. One example is lobby groups. Friends of Israel groups have funded 56 trips for British politicians, spending over £133,000 on trips for Labour, Conservative and Reform MPs, an earlier declassified investigation revealed. This was during the genocide. Each of these groups has highly opaque funding arrangements, and as recently as March, a major government inquiry found this country faces a persistent problem of foreign interests seeking to exert on and interfere in our politics. Yet, when 100,000 members of the public signed a petition for the British government to investigate Israeli influence, MPs called it anti-Semitic and likened colleagues defending it to the Nazis. The reporter behind Declassified's latest investigation, Danya Akkad, joins me now. Danya, welcome back to MEE Live. We have really missed you. Now, Richard Tice told Parliament that the debate on Israeli influence was anti-Semitic in its very motivation. Do you think that there's any validity to these concerns? How do we draw the line between legitimate scrutiny of foreign influence and conspiracy theories or even racism?
Hi, it's great to be back. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound clear.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, well, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I would say the first question I have really is, how did Richard Tice know what Andy Khalil, the petitioner's intent was with this debate, or, for that matter, the intent of the 118,000 people who signed on to this debate? So that's one question, but just to take this head on, those who were saying the debate was anti-Semitic were arguing that it was amplifying a persistent and a false narrative that Jewish people secretly control world events. And that's not what the petition said. And that was not the substance, nor the spirit of what the MPs who raised concerns at the debate said. And I think it's absolutely fair and the responsibility of those of us who want a functioning democracy to look soberly and intently at money flows and at their outcomes. And that's what I tried to do with our story. Fact, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs paid £50,000 to take a group of Reform UK figures to Israel. Fact, they came back parroting Israeli government positions. That's not a conspiracy. It's hyperlinked and it's fact-checked and you can read it. And, have I reported on influence of other countries and kind of similar trips in the past, and would I do it in the future? I have, and I will, and I think all of us should as journalists.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose, there's a very clear distinction between being concerned about Jewish influence over our government, when, of course, it's a very, very important influence that there is Jewish influence. We have many, many Jewish members of society, and being concerned about a foreign government's interference. That is not one and the same thing. Now, as you said, your investigation established that the Israeli Foreign Ministry paid over £50,000 to facilitate one single delegation from the Reform Party in the UK. Do we have any idea of the scale of the resources that Israel dedicates to these trips at large? And also, are they unusual in doing this, or is it just common practice around the world?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm really glad you asked. And unfortunately, right now, the answer is no. I can't give you at this moment an overall figure for how much Israel spends on these trips, nor kind of how it compares to other countries. But it's something I'd like to know. I think it's something the public should know. And that's something we're working on at Declassified, so watch this space. But I would just say that these trips are very commonplace. British lawmakers have been making them for decades. They were only required to register them in 2009. And it's definitely not just Israel funding them. There are several countries in the Middle East and North Africa alone, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Egypt, Kuwait, to name a few, that are funding these types of trips. So these trips have become a bit normalized, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be scrutinized and that people who should take them shouldn't be off the hook.
Yeah, because it suddenly it sort of seems to be a loophole in the law that doesn't allow foreign governments to fund parties directly. But we see a lot of that money coming through third parties. And among those third parties are these friends of groups. Now, you mentioned Reform Friends for Israel. This is led, as you report, by Jason Perlman, who until December was a media advisor to President Herzog. So friends of groups, they receive much less scrutiny than foreign states when it comes to political financing. But there's a big question mark about how distinct they really are. How clear is the line between an ostensibly independent friends of group and the Israeli government itself?
Yeah, this is another really good question, and it's an area that we should be investigating more. But technically, friends of groups are operating in a completely separate legal and political world to foreign states. They're usually registered as private companies in the UK, and there's no legal or regulatory obligation for them to declare their funding sources or their membership, and there are no limits on the amount of money they can donate or who they can donate to beyond kind of the normal rules that would apply to any British company. So it may not surprise you that most of them kind of operate a bit opaquely. But foreign governments, on the other hand, face much more regulation if they want to donate. So only British citizens, companies, and organizations are allowed to donate to MPs and political parties. Both foreign governments and friends of groups are allowed to pay for MPs to go on trips abroad. But it's also important to say that it's very easy for foreign governments to channel their money through third parties, as you said, which could potentially include, but it's not limited to, friends of groups. So technically separate, in reality, a bit murky.
Yeah. And again, it's worth noting that there are friends of groups affiliated with lots of different foreign countries. But what's really notable about Declassified's previous investigation is that a lot of these trips were happening during the ongoing Israeli war genocide in Gaza. Now, Reform's multimillionaire deputy leader, Richard Tice, went on a trip to Israel paid for by Reform Friends of Israel. He then claimed that the Gaza famine was a blatant lie. The famine in Gaza was confirmed by the World Food Programme, the World Health Organization, the UN, and many more groups. Is it fair to say that Tice's denial therefore raises serious concerns about the nature of these trips?
Yeah, look, I think his comments show why so many of these trips actually happen. They are attempts, in a large part to sway and influence, or at the very least, they give the perception that they are. I've also heard, I've heard politicians argue that these are fact-finding trips, and they help them understand the issues on the ground and forge diplomatic ties, and they complement their duties when they come back to the UK. But whatever the case is, whatever the fact of the matter is, I think these trips that politicians take that are funded by the countries they are visiting or lobby groups that are affiliated with those states should be scrutinized. And we should be tracking politicians where they go and then finding out what they do afterwards and what they say afterwards.
As you point out, Reform's given reason for the trip was, besides fact-finding, to study Israel's policing, border security, health service, and immigration control. If we are to take these reasons at face value, what learnings might Reform seek to take away from Israel in these areas, and should Brits be concerned about that?
Yeah, that was a point that also struck me. I can't speak to what Reform sought to take away from this trip, but I did wonder if Israel's model in these areas, particularly in policing, in the borders and immigration control, was really a model that most Brits would want their own country to emulate. One example was David Bull, the former chairman of Reform UK, pointed out after returning that they had visited the National Police and that they were using advanced technology that enabled them to fight all crime with very few police officers. And, obviously over the last few weeks, we've seen the tensions here in this country over the use of Palantir technology within the Metropolitan Police. And more broadly, of course, there are going to be those who are concerned that the technology the Israeli police are using is not only intrusive, but has also been designed and tested on Palestinians.
Now, as notable as this £50,000 from Israel is, it's a very small fraction of the foreign money pouring into Reform UK. How much does the Reform Party depend on overseas wealth?
Yeah, quite a lot at this point. Reform UK is rolling in cash right now. The latest Electoral Commission figures show that the party raised more than 9 million in the first 3 months of this year, and that was nearly half the entire amount of money that all parties raised put together. So it's a lot, and it's a lot more than others. And most of that, so 7 billion of that, was just from two sources, two British crypto billionaires who live overseas. And we also know that the party has been fundraising in wealthy expat communities like the United Arab Emirates. And Imran Mullah, your own Imran Mullah, had a great piece about this back in February with the details about two fundraisers there. So it's definitely a space to watch.
I mean, £9 million as 50% of the total donations raised by parties. It really calls into question this idea that democracy isn't for sale when you have such different resources afforded to different ideologies, not because they have a broader grassroots mandate, but because they have a small handful of incredibly wealthy donors. This is definitely an issue that needs more scrutiny. You approached both the Israeli embassy and Richard Tice, Reform UK's deputy leader, for comment. Did either respond?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked this. I did hear back from the embassy. I had gone to the embassy just to say, hey, I've looked at your transparency data about this trip, and I just wanted to double check that I understood this correctly, that you have indeed spent £50,000 on this trip. I gave them 4 hours to do it. They came back and they said, you didn't give us enough time. So I said, okay, fine. So we gave them another 4 hours, and we never heard back. Okay. And then with Tice did not respond, and I was kind of sad about that because I was really curious to know what he would say to the questions I asked him. One of them was whether he thought Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister who oversees the police, which the delegation visited, whether he thought that Itamar Ben-Gvir should have been sanctioned by the UK government. Anyway, perhaps a topic we can broach with him another day.
Dania Akkad, it's been great having you back. I should have probably specified why I was so excited to see you at the beginning, which is that, of course, you are Middle East Eye alumni. And though we miss you, you're doing an amazing job at Declassified UK. Thank you for giving us your time today. Now, finally, we end with some testimonies from the occupied West Bank. Since the 7th of October 2023, Israel has turned dozens of prisons and other facilities into military camps, where it is systematically torturing and abusing Palestinian detainees, most of whom are unlawfully being held without charge. Today, there are at least 9,000 Palestinians in Israeli captivity of this form. Middle East Eye sat down with Khalid Mahajna, a human rights lawyer who frequently visits some of Israel's most notorious prisons.
لكل أسير يرسم دائرة، هذا هو الحيز الخاص والشخصي لكل أسير، يبقى فيه وينام فيه ويأكل فيه ويصلي فيه ويبقى راكع على الأرض في هذا المكان بهذه الوضعية. لا يسمح للأسرى أن يتحركوا، لا يسمح للأسير أن يتحدث مع رفيقه من يمينه أو يساره. الأسير يبقى على مدار أيام وأشهر. ولكن كان يعني التفاصيل الأكثر مؤلمة التي ما زالت عالقة حتى اليوم هي كيفية يعني ابتكار أساليب التعذيب والتنكيل فيها. كيفية يتم اغتصاب الأسرى في داخل هذا المعسكر وفرض على الأسرى الآخرين إزاحة عصبة العين من أجل أن يشاهدوا مشهد الاغتصاب أمامهم. ونتحدث عن مئات الأسرى يتواجدون في صفوف، لا يوجد أقسام وغرف وزنازين. يتم سحب أسير من داخل هذا الصف بحالتين، إما بشكل عشوائي، إما الأسير يكون بمخالفة أمر ما من الأوامر المفروضة بداخل هذا المعسكر. وما هي المخالفات؟ أن الأسير يطلب أن يذهب للحمام في وقت الحاجة، أن يطلب المياه لمحرومين الأسرى من كل شيء من هذا المكان، أو يحاول أن يتحدث مع رفيقه وزميله الأسير من يمينه أو يساره. فممكن أن يوصل هذه التفاصيل البسيطة أو المخالفات البسيطة إلى الاغتصاب. فبالفعل يتم وضع الأسير في بمنتصف الساحة، وسط الساحة، وتجريده كليا من الملابس حتى الداخلية. هذا الأسير يكون مقيد اليدين والرجلين ومعصوب الأعين، يعني حتى الأسير لا يرى ما يمارس بحقه أمام أعين كل الأسرى الآخرين. تخيلي أن أحد الأدوات هي مطفأة الحرائق حمراء اللون. يعني يتم إدخال خرطوم مطفأة الحرائق إلى داخل مؤخرة أسير وضخها في داخل أحشاء الأسير ووضع تكون هذه الوضعية لعدة دقائق، وتوثيق الأنكى من ذلك والأكثر إيلام هو توثيق العملية. وثقت عمليات اغتصاب أسرى بواسطة جوالات المجندين والمجندات لكي يتناقلوها عبر منصات التواصل ومجموعات الواتساب من أجل التهكم والضحك على هذه العملية والتفاخر بالسادية والتفاخر بما يفعلون بحق الأسرى. ويتنافسون بالفعل الجنود الإسرائيليين على كل عملية من ينكل أكثر، من ينتقم أكثر، من يغتصب أكثر فأمام رفاقهم الآخرين.
That was Palestinian lawyer Khalid Mukhajna. And for today, that is all that we have time for. To all of you watching, thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, make sure you're following us on social media at Middle East Eye. You can email meelive@middleeasteye.net. I'll be here live at 5 every Tuesday and Thursday, noon if you're in New York. See you then.